Shalom Chavrim, I'm Stephen Ben-Nun. You're watching Israeli News Live here on World Harvest Television Network. Delighted to be with you once again, and going to be looking at some very interesting topic this evening, preparing for a new world order. Now we're going to actually go a little bit different maybe than what you're anticipating on this subject, but before we get started with that, I'd like to kind of highlight some of the things we've been seeing here this week. Of course, everybody knows about the eclipse across the United States. So many people were expecting big things. I kind of laid in the low light when it came to the eclipse that was going to cross the United States. No doubt maybe there is some symbolic significance there. Can't say myself what that might be. I didn't really go deep into that, but we didn't have no earthquakes as far as I'm aware of. I think we did over in Italy, but that's not here in the United States. No tidal waves or anything like that. But I know there's a lot of people that do watch that. Ourselves, we've been watching more so the situation unfolding in Venezuela. And those of you that have been watching this know that President Trump has talked about possibly military intervention in this country. When I brought this up on Israeli News Live on our YouTube channel, that kind of sent a flurry of people a little bit upset, saying, no, President Trump never said that, only to be followed up day after day with nothing but article after article from news sources all over the world talking about the United States' possible military intervention in Venezuela. Now, this, of course, no doubt going to make it even more unstable with the relationship between Russia and the United States, because Russia has already signed an aid package for Venezuela, offering them 60 metric tons of wheat monthly. In exchange, the Venezuelan government is allowing Russia to build some of their military equipment, some of the smaller types of similar to that of the Humvee being built there in Venezuela, but that could easily be turned into anything else. It could be turned into tanks or, well, whatever else you could think of that Russia could be building there. No doubt this is one reason why the U.S. is very concerned, but it wasn't Russia that destabilized the nation in the first place. Well, that kind of came right along the fact with the CIA admitting that they're involved in trying to help the opposition to overthrow the current government. And John Stockwell, former director of the CIA of operations there, said back in 1989 that the U.S. was notorious, the CIA was notorious for going around the globe destabilizing democracies. As he put it, anyone that doesn't have nuclear weapons, the CIA, if they deem it necessary, would destabilize those countries for the purpose that would serve the best interest for the United States. And we do see this happening. We saw it happen in Ukraine. There might be some dispute as to whether or not the U.S. caused the Maidan coup. Russia certainly seems to blame the CIA for the active involvement in their documentary, The Way Home, Crimea, The Way Home. They seem to make a very good case for CIA involvement, sharing some intercepted phone calls from the U.S. Embassy that was going to those in Crimea. And of course, well, there's a lot of other things we could say about that. We know that the U.S. has backed the Free Syrian Army, the rebels trying to overthrow President Bashar al-Assad. And currently, as far as Venezuela is concerned, the U.S. has admitted, the CIA has admitted they're trying to support the opposition and remove the current government. And of course, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea. I don't know. But nonetheless, the Venezuelan people are suffering, and I'm afraid we're going to end up seeing another situation like we did in Syria. And yet, I'm sure the United States does not want to have Russia this close to their doorstep in the southern hemisphere building weapons inside of Venezuela. So I kind of understand both sides of the coin here, but yet see a world totally becoming unstable and clearly just not in our best interest at all. So we're going to kind of get into some things here a little bit different than what we normally talk about here. We're going to be talking about preparing for a new world order. And of course, we're going to be looking at some issues that are currently going on in the United States. And really it's what caught my attention. It's from a website called Media, ITE. They were posting a CNN broadcast where Angela Rye statues of Washington, Jefferson, and Lee all needed to come down. This was on August the 17th, 2017 that this was posted here. And it really caught my attention. I did take time out. I listened to the CNN post there that they were doing on this. And this all came after President Trump, as they put on here in the quote on CNN, as Trump defends monuments, Duke statue defaced. Now, I myself, when I realize that a lot of the African American community that would like to see Confederate statues removed, I do have a sympathy and understanding of the bigotry or the racism that goes behind anything to do from the era of slavery in the United States. And I do deeply understand this and the reasoning why they would want these statues removed. In fact, though, when it comes to the first president of the United States, George Washington, that one kind of caught me off guard. But again, the reason why Miss Angela Rye says this is because, as she states, George Washington actually owned slaves, and this is one of the reasons why for pushing removing of George Washington's statue in the United States. And at the same time, I also understand when it comes to being an American, there's many Americans that the history of America, it's removing the history. We've seen a lot of things that have happened over the years, the Confederate flag being moved from different courthouse buildings in the South, as this push has been going to remove these objects that are considered inflammatory for some communities. And at the same time, I realize this is not just limited to the United States. And as I began to look at this a little bit more carefully, I realized there's a trend going on, and a trend that maybe we're totally missing the reason why it's happening. Let's look at this article right here from RT. Neither conscience nor reason. Russian MP blasts Polish bill targeting Red Army monuments. Again, though, we have to understand the Polish people. What did they feel about Russia when Russia came in to drive back the Germans? Well, my wife grew up in the former Soviet Union, so she understands what it's like to live under communism. She was there until, in fact, came to America on asylum from being religiously oppressed under communism. And so therefore, she doesn't have a very good view of a communist government, and a lot of times that's associated with Russia as well, because after all, it was Stalin and Vladimir Lenin, that actually brought in the communist atheistic type of belief inside this country of Russia that turned it into a communist nation, and then later the Soviet Union after the Second World War. It even flourished even more. Oppression went all through Eastern Europe that ended up falling into the hands of the Russian victors in this particular war, and even half of Germany. But the thing is what people may not realize is that Stalin and Lenin both were Jesuit trained. And the country of Russia originally was a very religious country at one time, taking the gospel to the eastern parts of the world, to China, etc. But once they toppled the last Tsar, they were able to successfully turn it into an atheistic nation, but by Jesuit-trained men. So Stalin and Lenin were actually put there to do what? It was to crush the Eastern Orthodox religion. Crush the Russian state religion, as it were. And I'm not one to stand here for the Eastern Christian religion as far as that goes, but I do believe that they have their right to believe and serve God the way they so choose. But this is where Poland comes in, and Poland became very offended by those statues. But yet, what about the Jewish people? Like, for example, that were in Auschwitz. I had family members that died in Auschwitz, as well as Dachau and many other concentration camps throughout Eastern Europe. But Russia was liberators when it came to those that were inside these concentration camps. Yes, it did cause an oppression afterwards, but you have to remember, that oppression was caused by Jesuit influence. And that's what Russia had become, a communist nation, an atheistic nation, but not the people themselves. Many of them still serve God secretly all along. But because of the bitterness of what the Poles felt by Russian occupation under Soviet, as far as a state under the Soviet Union, there is a bitter hatred towards those memorials, those monuments inside the country where the Red Army liberated them from the German occupiers. And they've long forgotten Nazi Germany and the evils that they did. Well, You have to keep in mind, too, there were a lot of collaborators in Poland as well with the Nazis to get rid of the Jews. That's why many of them don't like Russia to begin with. They didn't want the liberation, because for them it was not liberation. It was only freeing the Jews, something that they weren't very much interested in. But again, it's a racism of sorts being played out, just like in the United States. They are playing upon the emotions of the people in order to bring about a New World Order agenda. And this is what I begin to notice. Watch as we go on to another article here, The Guardian. Why Soviet monuments should be protected. People who deface and destroy statues across the former USSR are confusing the past with the present, says Agats Piasek. Now this happened to be, by the way, in Ukraine. And again, it's become Eastern versus Western Catholic type religions. The Russian Orthodox Church or the Eastern Orthodox Church versus the Western Orthodox Church, which would be the Vatican per se. And the lines are drawn right down the middle. And if you've watched the Ukraine conflict, you see that as well. You see the Catholic Church, the Vatican, or the Orthodox Catholic Church blessing the soldiers of the Ukraine to fight against the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox believers. They're over there blessing their soldiers to fight against the soldiers of Ukraine. I mean, what has it become? What is this going on? Why are they tearing down all these monuments? Again, The Guardian, vandalism, apartheid-era statues sparks fevered debate in South Africa. How South Africa confronts symbols of its difficult past are being discussed in newspaper columns, televisions, talk shows, and mainstream politics. What is really going on then? But you have to understand, as I'm watching this, I realize there is a very serious reason for why people feel bitter about a lot of these monuments and statues. But I'm also seeing history repeat itself. I'm seeing the time of the Inquisitions. I'm seeing the times of the Crusades where they went and because the church didn't agree with certain books and everything, they burned everything. I'm not saying that everything was good, but the point is they were totally eradicating any historical documentation whatsoever. It's not changed, friends. It's not changed at all. Look at the article here on the New York Times. The strategy behind the Islamic State's destruction of ancient sites. Syrian government forces, helped by Russian airstrikes, retook Palmyra from the Islamic State on March 27th, and experts are now assessing damage of the city's ancient monuments and artifacts. The Islamic State destroyed many archaeological sites as it expanded across Iraq and Syria, looting some for profit and damaging others to gain attention. Well, they did a lot more than just damage it for attention. They have been steadily, from the very beginning of the war, destroying a lot of these statues throughout here. In fact, one guy wrote me on Israeli News Live, and he says in the comments section there on YouTube, he says, well, I guess they'll take down the pyramids next. No, they won't take down the pyramids. You have to understand, a New World Order is very interested in erasing certain parts of history. Not all of the history, only certain parts of history they want to eradicate and make sure that the new generation that's coming up, your little children that haven't even had a chance to go to school yet, they're getting rid of everything that you can find historically, and they're using racism and tension and violence and wars to be able to eradicate all these things from history so that a new world order can take place. Nationalism must be a thing of the past in the New World Order theology. I know this because one of the insiders shared that with me. In fact, he said to me one of the things that they would do, if they couldn't do it from global warming as the answer to get the people to go to a New World Order, they would actually let the nations, the two superpowers, Russia and the United States, turn against one another and fight to the death, basically to break both countries, and then come out and say, see, nationalism will not work. Transhumanism, friends, is just the next step in this game. Another article here, CNN. U.S. Iraq says ISIS blew up a famous Mosul mosque. The United States and Iraq and ISIS blew up a historic mosque in Mosul that was the ideological heart of the terror group and the birthplace of its self-declared caliphate. Well, what was the purpose for blowing the mosque up? But you know what's interesting? It's not just limited to the statues. It's not just the George Washington or the Jefferson or the Robert E. Lee statue in the United States that's fueling tensions, that they're using that racial divide to destroy the historical documentation, or the Red Army where they fought in World War II and they're going to tear down all the statues there. And it's not just in the Middle East where ISIS is destroying certain Babylonian statues. It's not just the statues they're destroying also in the Middle East, such as Syria, Iraq, and other places, but they're also destroying the ancient documentation, the writings from the Eastern Church as well. The churches that have been destroyed in the Middle East are unbelievable numbers, and the ancient documents that have been burned or looted or taken or hidden or whatever the case may be. Why? They're eradicating everything they possibly can. So when the New World Order is ready to fully unfold, your children will have no idea any of these things ever existed. That's why it's a global event. South Africa, the East, Syria, Iraq. Do you realize when the military went into Iraq and overtook Iraq, one of the first places they went was the museums? They toppled the museums. They took all the ancient artifacts out of there. All the old documentations, all the ancient writings that were on stone that were thousands of years old, older than anything that we have, even biblically speaking. They took it. Where'd it go? So it's not just statues they're looking to take down, but even the mosque, the churches. In this article here on WND, the destruction could amount to a war crime according to the UN Human Rights Council. Such intentional destruction is an attack on the religious and cultural heritage of the Iraqi people and the whole world, the UN said Friday. International humanitarian law clearly prohibits such acts, and perpetrators who target these objects while being aware of their religious and historical character may be held accountable for war crimes. That's just to make you feel good. It's the agenda. It's what they're doing intentionally. They don't care about the war crimes. Has nothing to do with it. Nearly 200 Christians on WND exclusive. Churches destroyed in a surge of violence. Documents what the mainstream media failed to report. Here was a surge of anti-Christian violence by Muslims around the world that included the destruction of nearly 200 churches in Nigeria during a short period around October, according to a new report from the Gatestone Institute. Why are they destroying these churches? Don't worry, as they did in Iraq, they'll also take out the mosque as well. You remember, they're calling for a faceless religion. They're calling for the three monotheistic religions to unite under one God, and we all serve the same God. Don't forget that. That's part of that agenda as well. Global research. Iraq, the ultimate war crime, erasing the history of Mesopotamia, the destruction of Nineveh. Friends, this is a biblical destruction. Did you realize that? I've covered this on Israeli News Live on many occasions there, and I believe it's in the book of Habakkuk. I didn't think to put that in this particular article here that we're bringing out here for the news channel here, but I wish I would have thought about that at the time. But the book of Habakkuk clearly identifies that Nineveh, that ancient city, first it talks about how that they would flee from there. How that they would loot and sell all the fine furniture. They did. ISIS did. Some of it ended up on eBay. Isn't it strange how they do these things? But yes, they did all that. And then later it goes on to say, I believe in the 3rd chapter of Habakkuk, that the city becomes a desolation. And it never gets rebuilt. That, by the way, is Mosul. The ancient city of Nineveh is in Mosul. Let's read on in the article here. Iraq may soon end up with no history. Archaeologist Joanna Farkak quoted in Cultural Cleansing in Iraq, Pluto Press 2010, in his indispensable book From the Sumer to Saddam, Geoff Simons writes, "The region of the world that the ancient Greeks called Mesopotamia, land between the rivers, was a fount of civilization, a veritable crucible, cradle womb of cultural progress. Here it was the first cities were born, writing began, and the first codified legal systems were established here. Though such ancient lands as Sumer, Akkad, and Babylonian and Assyria, that the vital cultural brew was stirred, the quite remarkable concoction from which the Western civilization would emerge." That chapter, The Ancient Crucible, concludes, "We may reflect also that a modern Iraq is entitled to contemplate with awe a pride the fructifying riches of the cultures that first emerged in this land more than 5,000 years ago. From the day of the U.S.-UK invasion, that fructifying richness, societal, cultural, historic, has been systematically, deliberately erased in one of the most devastating, despotic, and desecrating, pulverizing cultural Armageddons in history." I mean, that's just completely unimaginable to think. But as I said, what are they doing it for? It's a new world order, friends. This is what this is all about. Breitbart News. Bulldozing monuments in the war on American history. So it's not just limited to South America or South Africa or Europe or the Middle East or the eastern part of Europe, Eastern Europe, or the United States. It's everywhere. It's global. It's a global phenomenon that they're trying to eradicate history. And now they're talking about doing a war in Venezuela. You know, we're also caught up with the idea that these wars that are going on are just about natural resources. It's more than just natural resources, but natural resources are a major role in the destruction of these nations, or the overtaking of these nations, I should add. The article here in Breitbart reads as this here. Editor's note, the following is a debate with Timothy Sandifer of the Pacific Legal Foundation over the New Orleans City Council's December 17, 2015 decision to remove 4 monuments relating to the Confederacy. Read Sandifer's article here. On December 17th, the New Orleans City Council voted to remove 4 Confederate statues from the city using obscure nuisance laws to strip these over 100-year-old historic monuments from their places of display. Mayor Mitch Landrieu said it was a courageous decision to turn a page on our divisive past and chart the course for a more inclusive future. Of course, the plan to remove the statues is itself divisive, as a number of preservation organizations have filed lawsuits to save the monuments. The New Orleans statues to be removed are the General Robert E. Lee, General PGT, Beauregard, and Confederate President Jefferson Davis. The city will also remove an obelisk dedicated to the Battle of Liberty Place. According to CNN, the Lee and Beauregard statues are on National Register of Historic Places. Now, in light of the compassion that I have for the Black American community on this particular issue, might I also suggest that the remaining of these statutes are also an important reminder of the evils that these statutes remind us of the past. And it should be historically preserved. But there again, my brothers, my sisters that are listening to me today, they are only playing on the emotions of the American people, both sides. Not just my black brothers and sisters, but the white community as well, the white brothers and sisters as well. They look at this as trying to remember the past, maybe for the sake of, well, it was the glorious time of the country, of the Southern Republic, or whatever you want to call it. But the thing is they're playing on both your feelings to turn you against one another. And it's all to serve the purpose to remove history. regardless of how evil our history is, we should have both good and bad there. We have a Bible, don't we? Everything that Israel did evil is recorded in that Bible, and we have that Bible as a reminder of the things that we did in the past that were wrong, that we should not do those things again. Many Christians wear a cross about their neck, the very instrument that was used in the crucifixion of our Savior, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, and yet we wear it around our neck. And I'm not against that. But my point is, do we abolish the cross as well? Well, they're planning on doing that too. Look at this article here on Fox News. Next couple of articles here from Fox News here. Cross in Pensacola Park must come down, violates Constitution, federal judge rules. Atheists across the fruited plain are rejoicing after a federal judge declared Monday that a cross erected in Florida Park violated the law and must come down. I am aware that there is a lot of support in Pensacola to keep the cross as is. And I understand and respect that point of view. U.S. District Judge Roger Vinson wrote in his ruling, but the law is the law. What do you know? I've seen that cross. I know about that cross. Does this mean now that they're going to take all the crosses that are in Arlington Cemetery, for example, and remove all of those as well? Maybe they will. You have to understand, in a new world order, there's no Jesus, there's no Muhammad, and there's no Moses. It's a faceless religion. It's inclusive. Well, maybe you could say Jesus if you want, and maybe you could speak about Moses as a Jewish person, and maybe you could speak about Muhammad as a Muslim. But the New World Order is going to eradicate everything, historically, the nations, the glory days of America or Russia or Europe or Germany or South America or any of these other nations here that lived on nationalism. Nationalism in a new world order must die. And that's what they're planning for you. Other article as well from Fox News, this one here from 2017, June 30th, University to remove cross and Bibles from campus chapel. East Central University said they will remove crosses, Bibles, and other religious symbols from a campus chapel to appease a bunch of out-of-town agitators. It's unclear when the Oklahoma school will commence with the Christian cleansing of the Catherine P. Boswell Memorial Chapel. The chapel opened in 1957. This is the New World Order. I'm Stephen Benoon. You're watching Israeli News Live.